Chapter 33. Moving Day. A little over 1 month later. The last month had been a hectic cyclone of activity that left poor Bibi frazzled and unsure of what was going on. A few days after Eventide had showed him the photos of their soon-to-be new home, the man had started disappearing for a few hours almost every day, stating that he had been taking driving lessons. This had been a part of the routine until a few days ago. And now, the time had come for them to pack their bags and move out. Eventide had taken Buddha out early that morning and came back home without her. He told Bibi that he had put the dog in Fluttershy's care while everything was being moved, to make sure she didn't feel scared, and to ensure she didn't get in their way. A short time later, a long white vehicle had pulled up outside of the house. The driver had left the vehicle and knocked on the door, sending Eventide into immediate action. He had scooped Bibi up, raced downstairs, and hid him away under the bed. He ordered him to stay put before racing back up the stairs and closing the basement door behind him. That was a few hours ago, and in that time Bibi had done as he had been told and had not moved an inch. He was sequestered underneath his bed, while loud noises from upstairs told him that all of the furniture was being picked up and moved outside, into something called a moving van. Bibi had absolutely no idea what that was, but at the moment it didn't really matter. All he cared about was doing exactly what his father had told him. Stay here and stay hidden. Under no circumstances whatsoever are you to come out from under here or let anyone but me see you. If someone's coming, even if it's me, hide until I tell you it's safe. I cannot stress this enough. Stay hidden. Bibi was nervous. Okay, scratch that. Bibi was absolutely terrified. He could hear Eventide and one other person moving around upstairs, talking loudly to each other while they moved the furniture. The activity filling the air with a loud cacophony of bangs, thumps, thuds, and scrapes. Even from his hiding place under his bed in his basement, Bibi could make it all out quite clearly. He shifted in place under his bed uncomfortably, doing his absolute best to keep his mind occupied with happy thoughts. This was a good thing, he told himself. They were going to be moving to a new place today, and that meant that he could finally go outside and be safe from other people. He was extremely excited about that, but that actually made it even harder to remain still. Thankfully, any temptation to move was swiftly curbed when he heard the basement door swing open, and not one but two sets of descending feet at a brisk pace. A male voice that Bibi did not recognize spoke up in surprise. Whoa, do you have a son or something, Eventide? No, this is all left over from when my nephew was staying over, Eventide replied without missing a beat, though Bibi did not miss the slight hitch in his voice. I might have to look after him again sometime, so I'm keeping all this stuff. Huh. Didn't know you had a nephew. I thought you were an only child, the other man said thoughtfully. Guess you were wrong then. Mind filling me in? I'd rather not get into my family life, okay, Sweep? It's a long, complicated, and messy story, and... Eventide paused mid-speech, and Bibi noticed a few flickers of red and dark blue in the air beyond the confines of his bed. I'd just rather not talk about it, okay? We've got enough on our plates without dragging up my old family drama. All right, fair enough, Sweep conceded before shifting on his feet. So, what do we haul on first? He asked casually, seemingly unfazed by Eventide's evasiveness. Why don't you go ahead and grab that lamp and toy box, Eventide suggested, walking over towards the bed. I'm gonna get some of these old kids' books into my backpack. All right, I can do that, Sweep replied before stepping over and lifting something up. There were a few moments where the two moved around before Sweep spoke again. All right, got it. See you topside. With that, Bibi listened as his footfalls disappeared back up the stairs. Silence filled the room, save for some quiet rustling, and everything was motionless. Against his better judgment, Bibi started to inch out from under the bed. Daddy? He asked in a quiet, tense whisper. Suddenly, An open backpack landed directly in front of his face with a heavy thump, making him flinch back with a startled chirp. He relaxed when he saw that it was filled with a few of his favorite books. Then, Eventide crouched down, his face becoming visible. It was stern and tense. "BB, get into the backpack," he said simply. BB blinked in surprise.
What?
"Don't ask me any questions, we don't have time," Eventide emphasized sharply before reaching out and grasping one of BB's hooves. His grip was firm, though not harsh or painful, and he swiftly tugged the bug out from under the bed. "Sweep won't be gone for long. Get in the backpack and be as quiet as possible." BB looked up in Eventide's eyes, then into the depths of the backpack. He cringed back when he realized just how cramped it was in there.
It's small,
he noted timidly.
"I know, B. I'm sorry."
Eventide apologized softly while ushering BB inside with his hand.
"It's gonna be cramped and it's gonna be bumpy, but there isn't much I can do about that. Just hold still, be quiet, and hang on, all right?"
BB, once he was fully inside, turned around to look back at his father. He gave a slow nod before his ears were filled with a loud zip, and the bag was closed. His world was plunged into total darkness, though the blue glow of his eyes quickly compensated and allowed him to see. He wanted to whimper so badly right now. Every single one of his childish instincts were screaming at him to go seek a parent, to call out for one for safety and protection. It didn't help that the space was not only tight and uncomfortable, but the books he was standing on were less than ideal to rest against. Suddenly, his stomach fell right out of him as the bag was lurched skyward. BB couldn't help but let out a startled chirp from the movement, and his wings instinctively tried to buzz on his back. The claustrophobic space prevented this, and he felt his right wing flare up with a small cramp from the motion. Gravity tipped back, and BB slid down a little deeper into the pack. "You okay in there?" Eventide's voice came from above, muffled through the fabric. A few faint wisps of his love and concern for BB's well-being seeped through, and the bug was only all too happy to soak it in. Once he had slurped down the small stream of emotions, he spoke.
I'm scared, Dada.
"I know, buddy."
With that, Eventide made his way upstairs. BB knew this because of how bumpy the ride suddenly became, and the sound of his father's shoes repeatedly thumping against the wooden steps. They passed through the living room and out the front door. BB was outside for only the second time in his life. He could feel it. He could hear the bird singing more clearly than he ever had before, and the backpack began to warm up as the sunlight hit it. He could just feel the tiniest hints of a breeze through the fabric, and the mostly foreign sensation made him shudder.
"All right, we should probably get that big bed out of the way next,"
Sweep's voice suddenly said from right next to Eventide, making BB jump. He held perfectly still, sealing his lips closed and screwing his eyes shut.
Sure. Head on down and get into a good spot to lift,"
Eventide answered before hefting the backpack for emphasis.
"I'll follow you down once I got this put away."
BB could hear Sweep walking away, then a clunking sound. Then, the backpack was lifted off of Eventide's back and set down on something. BB let slip a silent sigh of relief as the books were put under his hooves again, gravity returning to normal, and his orientation was once again upright. The zipper pulled back, and Eventide peeked in through the small opening.
"You all right?"
he asked in a worried whisper.
"I wasn't too rough, was I?"
I'm scared, and now I'm sore.
BB replied quietly, inching towards the light.
But I'm okay. Can I come out yet?
Eventide looked away slightly and shook his head in a regretful apology.
"No, not yet. Just stay put, all right?
If anyone opens this door..." He turned and let BB see the oddly shaped door that he was leaning through. "Do not move or say anything.
Be perfectly and completely still and don't make a single sound.
You keep telling me to do that.
BB anxiously observed before swallowing heavily at the serious look on Eventide's face. Yeah, because this is important. Clean Sweep's a good guy, but I don't trust anyone but Fluttershy and myself with you. So, I am going to keep telling you to make sure you do it. Stay still. Stay quiet. Do you understand me? BB shied away a little, but still gave a silent nod. Eventide relaxed, if only somewhat. All right. This is still gonna take a while, so hang in there, bud. You're doing great so far. With that, the backpack was zipped shut again, and BB was returned to darkness. The next 30 or 40 minutes were spent carefully taking each and every item out of BB's bedroom and storing it in the back of the small moving van that Eventide had rented. They had just enough space in the back to squeeze in everything, thankfully, and as such would only need to make one trip that day to get everything to the house. You sure you got that? Eventide asked worriedly as Clean Sweep lifted up the last piece of furniture, BB's end table. The other man gave a nod and a smile. Yeah, compared to everything else, this is child's play, he gloated before starting up the stairs. He wobbled a little on his way up, but was quick to catch his balance, chuckle nervously, and continue his ascent. Eventide watched him go, an amused smirk on his face before he turned and looked around at the basement. It was empty. There was no longer a single piece of furniture within its confines. Save for the paint on the walls and the rug he had put onto the floor, it was now even more devoid of things than it had been when he had first adopted BB almost a year ago. Even the old shelves that had once stored unused knickknacks against the wall were gone. Eventide leaned against one of the support beams for a moment, just letting it all sink in. Everything that had happened so far in this one room alone. From the day BB hatched, to the times he had become ill, and more recently, his efforts to get better with his magic. 11 months, almost 12. Had it really been that long already? It sure didn't feel like it. Eventide let out a small sigh of nostalgia before reaching up and pulling on the chain that dangled from the ceiling one last time. Time flies, huh? He asked as the basement, BB's former bedroom, was filled with total darkness. Eventide stared into that shade for a few more seconds before turning away, heading up the stairs and closing the door behind him. The whole house was in a similar state. Every single piece of furniture that Eventide owned had been moved out into the moving van, leaving the house feeling exceedingly empty. He walked slowly, giving each room a parting look before he stepped outside and closed the door behind him. He hesitated then, and a soft breeze washed over him. This is really happening, he thought to himself, the realization finally setting in. He'd been building up to this for so long now, and yet it had always felt like it would never happen. He backed away from the door and looked at the house. The building that had served as his home for several years now. The first place he had gone to after leaving his parents behind. The place where his son had come into his life. Well, that wasn't entirely true, was it? Eventide turned and looked at the tree in the yard, the one where he had found BB's egg. It was still there, standing proud, its leaves starting to gain just the faintest of yellow tints as summer began to give way for autumn. Eventide smiled softly at the memory and walked over to it. He stood there for a time, looking up and down its trunk, drinking in the details. He then crouched down by the spot where BB's egg had been resting and placed his hand on the tree. I know there's nothing here that can hear me, but he began in a near-silent voice, his mind trailing back to the first time he had brought BB outside, and how the two of them had jointly thanked this tree for being the place where they came together. He reached out his hoof to the tree again.
Thank you, tree,
he said quietly, making Eventide tilt his head. Why are you thanking the tree, Bee? He asked, genuinely curious. BB smiled back up at him.
Because it gave me to you, Daddy.
Oh, there goes the heart, Eventide thought, his smile growing. He looked up at the tree himself and put his hand on it next to BB's hoof. Yeah, I guess you're right. Thank you, tree. Buddha looked at them for a moment, then rested her chin on one of the roots that managed to avoid being smothered in snow so far. The father and his son might be here for a little while, she felt. No need to rush them. His smile grew, and he withdrew his hand. Thank you again. Thank you so much for letting BB into my life. With that, he stood tall and took a deep breath. What the? Clean Sweep's shocked voice suddenly rang out from the passenger side of the van. Eventide's blood ran cold. As much as BB wanted to follow Eventide's commands, it was getting increasingly hard to do so. Not only was the backpack significantly smaller than underneath his bed, it was also a lot less comfortable. The hard surface of the picture book's covers he so loved were like stone compared to the carpet of his bedroom, and his complete inability to flex his wings was driving him mad. Finally, after 45 minutes of this, he could take no more.
Just a little look around. Maybe stretch my wings.
He promised to himself before his horn lit up with green light, and he reached out. Being careful not to grasp anything yet, he was able to worm his reach through the teeth of the zipper line and found the zipper itself. Grabbing onto just its very tip, he began moving it. He could feel his head starting to ache from the effort of using his magic like this, and his lack of familiarity with what he was using it on wasn't helping. Thankfully, he managed to pull it open an inch or so, at which point he halted the flow of his magic and let his horn go dark. Sighing with relief, he wedged his muzzle into the small gap and forced it open wider. Little by little, he opened the pack and squeezed out. Soon, he was stepping out and into a new environment. He looked around and, after a moment, was able to identify it as being similar to the cars he had seen in cartoons on TV. It was bigger, though, and some of the shapes were different. He spun slowly in a circle as he took everything in.
This must be the moving van,
he thought to himself. He studied the interior for a moment longer before starting to stretch his incredibly stiff and sore muscles, letting his wings buzz a little on his back. He let out a satisfied groan as his tension was relieved, then turned to head back into the relative safety of the backpack. Suddenly, there was a loud thunk from the back of the van. The noise sent vibrations through the seat BB stood on, startling him. With a cry, he fell backward and off the seat to crash to the floor below. He hit the ground and let out a grunt from the impact, screwing his eyes shut. He took a second to bite back any vocalizations of pain, then opened his eyes and picked himself up. His ears twitched as a sound came to them. Footsteps. BB's eyes flew wide open, and a surge of fear and adrenaline began to pump through his veins. He looked up at the backpack and hopped up towards it. Whoever it was getting closer. BB tried to squeeze back into the pack, but was horrified to discover that he hadn't opened it enough to make re-entry possible in time to avoid being seen. Whoever was coming was still drawing closer. Now on the verge of an absolute panic attack, BB pulled his head back and quickly dove back down to the floor,
hoping for a hiding place. There was none. He was completely exposed. Now hyperventilating, BB looked up towards the open window. He could just make out someone's shadow on the frame, and it was not Eventide's. He screwed his eyes shut.
Why the hell you leave the backpack? Why didn't I just do what Daddy told me?
He screamed at himself in his mind. He knew that there was a stranger here. He knew that he wasn't supposed to let himself be seen. Now, because he was so impatient, he'd put himself right in the open. He was going to be seen. He was going to be taken away by men in lab coats and experimented on with needles or something. He was going to lose his father, and it was all because he couldn't have waited for another few minutes because he couldn't just do as he was told. He was so enveloped in his terror, in his dread of being seen and taken away because he was so different, that he didn't even notice the green light on his horn, or the sudden swirl of green flames that wrapped around him before vanishing just as quickly as they came. He heard the steps come to a stop. He heard something being set down on the seat, and fearfully opened one of his eyes. The man in the window looked back down at BB, and his eyes went wide.
What the?
He yelled before taking a step back. Here it came. BB watched him apprehensively, expecting the man to reach down and try to grab him, or to run away or something. He began to open his mouth to say something, but stopped. Something was wrong. His fangs were missing, and his tongue felt a lot shorter and wider. The man stared at him for another few moments, and the fear that had been bleeding off of him flickered and changed into something brighter. A combination of pale blue and sunflower yellow, the colors of relief. He let out a chuckle and glanced over as someone else approached.
Hey, I think I found that other pet you keep mentioning,
he said with a big grin before stepping back. Eventide suddenly appeared in the window, his eyes wide and filled with abject terror. Dread and fear were bleeding off of him in record amounts, putting a terribly rancid and bitter taste in BB's mouth. He stifled the urge to gag and looked up at his father, and the two locked gazes. Eventide's face went from terrified to confused, and the emotions bleeding off of him shifted colors to match.
What?
BB blinked and tilted his head. In doing so, he finally noticed the two long ears covered in thick black fur that were hanging off the sides of his head. He turned his head when he felt them moving, hoping to get a look, and it was then that he realized that his entire body had changed. Where once there had been a small, chitin-clad quadruped with enormous glowing blue eyes and insectoid wings, there was now a dog. A black border collie with a triangle of white fur on his chest and striking blue eyes. BB looked at himself for another few seconds, then looked into Eventide's eyes again.
Tide? You alright?
Sweep's voice asked from behind Eventide, jarring him out of his stunned state. He spun around and gave Sweep a large grin.
Yeah, my other dog. He's super shy, so, doesn't like strangers.
Sweep nodded along slowly, and BB could see the suspicion in the air around him.
I gotcha,
he said slowly.
What's his name?
BB glanced back at BB, then back at Sweep.
BB.
Sweep smiled widely, his skepticism slowly fading away.
Aw, that's a cute name.
Eventide chuckled sheepishly.
Yeah, it is.
Anyways, he clapped his hands together, swiftly changing the topic.
Do we have everything in the van?
Sweep hesitated for a second, then gave a nod.
Yeah, everything's in. Anything else you need me for here?
Eventide shook his head quickly. Nope, I think we've got it. Thanks for coming over and helping me out, man," he said, his tone gradually starting to relax. Sweep gave a smile and a nod. "Sure thing. But are you sure you don't need any help moving the stuff inside when you get to your new place?" Eventide shook his head. No, I already have someone else helping me with that. You've done plenty." "All right. If you need anything else, though, give me a ring," Sweep conceded before turning and walking out of BB's line of sight. "I gotta head home. I got Ogres and Oubliettes with the girlfriend tonight." "Okay. Give her my best. Have fun, and thanks again. Bye, Clean Sweep." Eventide called after him while waving enthusiastically. There was a muffled response that BB couldn't quite make out before he heard the sound of another car starting up and driving away. As soon as it was fully gone, Eventide spun around and looked down at BB with his confusion returning.
BB, is that you?
He asked in a strained and hushed voice. BB nodded slowly, his new tongue rolling out to instinctively lick at his chops. He had to resist the urge to gag when he tasted his fur and snout.
Ew, doggy snot.
Nonetheless, he found his voice and answered.
"Yeah, I think so,"
he said experimentally, and was amazed to find that his voice was exactly as it always was, if perhaps without the slight distortion. Eventide just stared at him for a moment, becoming visibly relaxed and relieved as the tension of the situation bled away. He then stood upright and his face formed into a frown. "So, why are you a dog?"